Alright, good evening folks, it's Enforcer Matt and welcome back to another short war video, and today we're receiving very big news coming out of France once again that they are finalizing their plans to potentially send troops to Ukraine, and we're getting some more information about that. And we're also learning that yet another Moldovan breakaway region is asking for Russia's help to defend their territory. So we're receiving very big news today, and let's go ahead and jump right into our first article of the day, which is from Nexta. In this article, we can see that France is considering allowing its special forces and some other units to cross the Ukrainian border, and such a measure is seen as a means of creating a strategic dilemma for Russia, according to Le Monde. So as we see here, France is not backing off the idea of sending troops to Ukraine, and in fact, they're actually selecting the exact troops they want to go, which would be their special forces units. And right now, it seems like those troops would be in a non-combat role, so they would not be there to fight on behalf of Ukraine, but they would be there on behalf to support the troops and also help conduct maintenance operations on the vehicles, or at least that's the official thing being said in the public, but certainly a major escalation indeed, and it does sound like France is serious about sending troops there, which to me is somewhat surprising, and France is not the only one either. We do have another country here, which we covered last night on our stream, Canada. It says here in this post from Nexta that Canada is ready to deploy troops to Ukraine under certain conditions, says the defense minister, and in an interview with the Toronto Star, he emphasized that the country is prepared to send military personnel not to take part in combat operations, but to train Ukrainian troops and perform non-combat tasks away from the front line. So we can see that Canada and France are really the two countries that are leading the charge to advocate for troops to be sent to Ukraine, and at this point, it seems like they really want to do this. They're really not just saying it for political reasons at this point. They're saying it because they feel it to be necessary. And for just some speculation here, the couple of reasons they might be trying to do this, one is they think that Ukraine is going to start losing ground soon, and they want to go put some troops on the ground to prevent Russia from moving as fast as they would have otherwise, or they simply want to put troops on the ground over there because they actually believe the equipment needs some maintenance and the Ukrainian troops aren't keeping up with it. So those are two options for it. But I'm sort of leaning toward the first option here. If you'll notice, in the post from Nexta about Macron here, it says that such a means of sending soldiers is creating a strategic dilemma for Russia. And that would sort of play into that idea I just mentioned a moment ago. That would create an issue for Russia because either they have to avoid striking these France forces while they're trying to move forward in Ukraine, which would obviously hold them up, or they're going to have to just attack wildly and end up risking hitting France forces, which would obviously cause a war to break out. So I'm not sure if this like dead man's trigger form of a defense method by France is really a good idea or not. It just depends on all the intel behind the scenes, and we don't have access to all the intel, so we don't know what they're seeing, but it is possible that Russia is planning a pretty big escalation with NATO countries, or perhaps even in Moldova, and that's why France and Canada are all of a sudden becoming so aggressive with their strategy to help defend Ukraine. But with that, we're moving into our next post here, which goes to the Kyiv Post. And the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has come under fire from NATO allies for hinting at the possibility that the UK and France have deployed troops to Ukraine to help with long-range missiles that they've supplied. And they're calling this the foot-and-mouth problem here. Apparently, Scholz made a suggestion, which he should not have made, suggesting that the UK and France troops are actually in Ukraine helping maintain those long-range missile systems. And I'm not entirely sure if that was a slip of the tongue or not. I think he might have accidentally said something that he shouldn't have said, and that's why NATO is so angry about him saying it. But it is possible that it's simply a misconception, and he accidentally said something that wasn't true. But at this point, I'm really not very sure about that. It seems like this might be something that might have happened already, and that NATO wanted him to keep quiet about it. But nonetheless, Scholz has said something that he shouldn't have said, and he is in big, big trouble now. But with that, we're moving on to our next post here, which also goes to Nexta. And we're learning another Moldovan region has asked for Russia's protection against the Moldovan government. It says here, the head of Moldova's autonomous region of Gagauzia, and hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, they arrived in Moscow today and met with Valentina, the chairwoman of the Federation Council of Russia, and Gutul stated that the rights of the region are oppressed by Moldova, and it crosses all borders, and the region asks for Russia's support. It also says here, the Moldovan President Sandu had earlier reported that Gagauzia is undergoing a large-scale propaganda campaign by Moscow against the country's leadership and EU benefits. And we covered this a couple of days ago. Already, one Moldovan region has asked for Russia's protection, meaning basically they want Russia to annex that territory and take it into Russian custody because they feel that they're being quote-unquote oppressed by Moldova because of some economic policies that are being implemented in Transnistria. So this, to me, once again, sounds like Russia is ramping up their preparations to potentially invade the region of Transnistria and annex it. We'll have to wait and see on this, but certainly concerning indeed. And with that, we're moving on to our next post here, which goes to the UK Defense Journal, and we see that any Russian attack on NATO faces an overwhelming response, says a Britain's defense chief, and he reminded Russia of that the NATO air forces, which outnumber Russia's 3-1, would quickly establish air superiority, and that NATO warships would bottle up the Russian Navy. So this is the foreign policy way of saying, make my day, punk. To Russia, because Russia here is basically being told your air force is dwindling, you're losing aircraft daily, and NATO would absolutely crush you. And that is true, and I think even Putin acknowledges that fact, that his air force and also his army would be absolutely crushed by NATO forces. And that's why you see Russia ramping up these nuclear threats tremendously, is because they know their sovereign defense relies solely on nuclear weapons, and that's the only way they can ensure that the West isn't going to take some type of action toward them. With that, let's go ahead and move on to our next post here, which goes to Visegrad 24. And returning to the Navalny story here, we can see that thousands of Russians are defying Putin by attending Navalny's funeral today. And the more Russian soldiers the Ukrainian army manages to take off the battlefield permanently, the more unrest there will be in Russia. So let's take a look at this video right here, because it is quite interesting. This is something that Russia did not want to happen, which is a large amount of people attending Navalny's funeral, which shows the public of Russia that there is a big support for the underground movement that Navalny started, but people are simply scared to speak out without being in numbers. So let's take a look and see what we have. And as you can hear, they are chanting, they're chanting numerous things actually, including Putin is a killer. We'll look at that in just a moment. Large group of people channeling through here to the funeral, and you can see right here, all of these vans are actually Russian police forces, and they are scattered in the area to try to keep the situation under control. But I think the damage is already being done, so they're not going to do much good there. But as we can see, they are just absolutely pouring in a ton of support for Navalny and his movement. And they're going there to pay their last respects. So with that, that's about all that video is going to show here. So let's move into our next one. And we see from Anton Gerashenko that police have started a they've arrested a person at the farewell ceremony of Navalny, says the Russian media. So let's take a look, and we can see the police here dragging someone away. And there they are. It's the Russian police forces, or some type of forces, probably not FSB, but maybe just police. They're dragging him to one of those police vans that we saw from above, and they're taking him into custody. So I'm sure the Russian police, if they could, would love to take everybody at that funeral into custody, because they are essentially all enemies of the state, according to Putin. But obviously they're having to pick and choose the most highlighted and valuable ones to actually take away. But with that, let's move on to our next post here, which is from Nexta. And this is that chant I was just talking about a moment ago. They're chanting Putin is a killer on the ground. And you can hear them chanting it right there. So quite an angry crowd indeed, and also quite a charged crowd, because as you know, speaking out in Russia is very dangerous, and out here chanting Putin is a killer at one of the funerals of one of his arch nemesis will certainly put these people on a list, if they're not already on it. But with that, moving on to our next post here, we can see the most important chant of all. The people that were there at the funeral are chanting, bring the soldiers home from Ukraine, because they don't like this war and they believe it's unjustified. And if you just do a check amongst the crowd real quick, something interesting to me is these all appear to be younger people. I don't see a ton of middle-aged or older people in this crowd here, which would line up. The younger people in Russia are the ones that really don't want the war, and it's more of the older heads, the ones that are sort of still accustomed to the Soviet ways, that are either okay with it, or they're sort of just standing by and letting it happen. So the young people are out in force to support Navalny and his movement. And I have to say, it's good to see it, because the young generation will be responsible for basically trying to stop this madness, because I think the old people are simply too out of shape in Russia to get that done, and it's up to the younger population to actually do that. So it's good to see they're out here in pretty large numbers, by the way. But with that being said, we're moving on to our last article of the day, which is from Insider Paper. And we're getting some more news about that Ukrainian UFO that we saw on the battlefield. It says a Ukrainian soldier who filmed the UFO was bigger than the Empire State Building over the war zone in Donetsk, and he told the Daily Mail that it sat deathly still against the winds and was hotter than anything I've ever seen. So this was quite a story that came out yesterday. This UFO was believed to be a glitch, but now we're learning more details here, which may indicate this actually was not a glitch, and it was indeed something unexplained. So, I'm not a conspiracy theorist personally, but I really can't explain this very much, and I know people are going to try to sort of explain this away, but I'm not really sure if we can without some more details or actually haven't been there in person. But with that is actually our last piece of news for the day. I hope you found this video informative, and if you have, press that like button and also subscribe to the channel as well, because that greatly helps us get the news out there. And also, go and sign up on our Patreon page as well. You can find the link in the description below, and you can support us that way as well. That helps us keep putting the news out and helps the entire operation keep running, and we appreciate that financial support very much. And with that, we'll see you all tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern on our nightly war news stream, and bye-bye for now.